I think I want to talk about, and this is one where I actually stretched a little bit outside of my traditional roles and responsibilities.
Sometimes it's helpful to understand who the candidate is, what role they're going after, and what company they're targeting. For those of you who are new here, my name is Brandon Watson. I'm a former senior executive from Amazon, Microsoft, Oracle. I've started companies, I've sold companies, I've kind of done it all. This candidate is seeking an account executive, or call it a sales role, at Amazon, and the leadership principle on which we are focusing is insist on high standards. The core concept that we're trying to hit with this question is, how well do you hold others accountable? And what I asked this candidate was, tell me about a time where you pushed forward and pushed on to achieve a great outcome where others thought that maybe a good one was not only possible, but the preferable outcome. So what are some of the things to look for in this video? Well, first and foremost, how long does it take you to get to the point? And I have seen a lot of content from interview coaches and people that purport to help people with interviews, and they'll make very straightforward statements. You must have your answers at 1 minute. You must not go over 3 minutes. And I'm here to tell you that's just wrong. It's bad information. It's terrible advice. Please don't follow it. So why is it terrible advice? Well, there is no limit to the length of your answer. But, and this is a big but, this is a Sir Mix-a-Lot type but your answer should only be as long as it needs to be and not one word longer. The best path to getting the right length of your answer is to use the star fact method. And I'll link to that playlist of mine at the end of the video, so you can go look at that if you want. But that's really focusing on answering the questions that matter rather than ad-libbing your way through an answer in an interview, and you just ramble and you talk and you talk and you talk, and ultimately you're not delivering content of value for me, the interviewer, who's trying to decide, can you do this job at this company and likely exceed expectations? Another thing to look for, are you, as the candidate helping me, the interviewer, understand the stakes of what it was you were trying to do? Do I have a clear picture in my mind? Because I haven't worked with you. I haven't worked at the company. I don't know what you're trying to do. Help me understand the stakes of what you're trying to do.
This was in late 2020. At that point, I was a director, and in that capacity had responsibility for and oversight into the global sales strategy, and specifically was working in Indonesia and Cameroon to figure out the sales strategy there. However, this particular project doesn't necessarily have to do with sales. What it does have to do with is the process which comes directly after sales. So in 2020, what we were finding is that the deployments for our customers was taking longer than expected. So our target from when a customer signs their contract and is through the sales process to when they're live using our application up and running, we were targeting 4 weeks for that. And that was what management, who was responsible for that service delivery process, which is what we called it, and also senior levels up to the CEO, had identified as being the target we wanted to hit. What caused a little bit of concern, first from me and then from from the whole team, and what got me originally interested in it, was that we were taking on average about 20 to 30% over that 4-week target. So it'd take 5 weeks sometimes, but there would be also cases where, of course, it would take much, much longer than that. So, of course, this was affecting the sales team because we would get people signed up, but they would be much longer it would take much longer for them to produce revenue than we were expecting. That was hurting the sales team because, of course, the sales team's bonuses, commissions are based off of revenue generated, not revenue booked, or revenue collected, not generated. So what I then did is stepped over and.
So one of the first things I do want to jump in and say here is, it is your responsibility as the candidate to get to the point faster. And while there's a lot to like here, just in terms of he's giving good background material, the candidate is giving good background material and helping me kind of understand a bit more of what was going on inside the company, you have to ask yourself, again, is this necessary? The interviewer doesn't need to know everything there is to know. They only need to know what they need to know. And so some pruning when you're presenting your stories can oftentimes trim off a lot of the fat And you do that by making sure you're answering the right questions. We'll get to that at the end of his answer block, but that's, there's good ownership. He's taking on work outside of his responsibility. That's great. He's walking through a process. Hey, that's great. There's some use of metrics. All of that is good, but it's taking a really long time to get there. And I, as an interviewer, you know what's happening? I'm starting to lose interest because I don't know how this is tying back to the question that I asked. Because I still don't know what the core conflict is, which is what were they trying to do where other people thought it was okay? It's taking too much time. So that's one of the things you have to focus on when you're building out your stories.
Started working with the service delivery team. And we started by looking at what their current process was and how they ended up with this 4-week target. And what they were looking at doing is how can we work? Well, I'll pause or step back here. The reason that they had identified that we were going over that 4-week target is because they were having significant challenges getting the proper data from the customers, which would then allow them to deploy our customers onto the system. And I can go into what kind of data that is if you'd like.
Just at a high level, what are we talking about here? One of the things you want to do as the candidate is try to create a conversational interview, right? A conversational meeting. You don't want it to feel like an interrogation of you, certainly not. But you want me, the interviewer, to walk out of the room and advocate for you. And one of the ways I'm going to do that is I feel like, we kind of built a little bit of a mini relationship in the time that we have together. And part of the way that happens is you create an interactive session between us. One of the things he did, the candidate did really well here, is he's like, hey, I can talk about the data, might be in the weeds. He kind of opted for calling an audible and saying, I can go into details or not. He gave me the option. He forced me, the interviewer, to re-engage. Right? Remember in the last kind of little point I made, I said, well, I was starting to tune out. But at this point, he's now asked me a direct question. Right? So it's like getting your name called in a meeting when you're not paying attention on a Zoom call or whatever. All of a sudden you're like, whoa, I heard my name. I now have to re-engage. He's forcing the conversation. A+.
So a financial institution has customers, they have loans, and they have deposit products. And there's a bunch of data associated with all of that. In order to get them up and running on our core banking system, we had to get that data pulled out of their core banking system and then uploaded. That part of getting it out of their core banking system is what was taking a lot of time, effort, and slowing people down.
Also of note, despite the fact that he took or is taking a long time to get to the point in the main part of his answer block, that was a 15-second sub-answer. I asked a follow-up question, gave me quick 15 seconds, didn't get mired in the muck, didn't start talking about fields and type of data. It was a very high level clarity around here's what it is, here was a problem, now he's ready to move on. Also good. So there's a mix of kind of good and okay in this answer, but that was good. One of the nicest compliments that I get on a repeated basis, although I could argue it's kind of a backhanded compliment, is that my advice is very direct to the point and I don't pull any punches. And that's kind of my personality type and I get it. But the reason I do that is because, well, I want you to understand what you're doing wrong in your interviews and what my customers are doing wrong in their interviews so that you can perform better when you're trying to land your dream job.
Okay. That's clear?
Yep.
Cool. So what the service delivery team was looking at was how do we help solve this problem where, getting the data for our customers is such a challenge. That line of inquiry probably would have brought us down back around that 4-week target. And this is now, I wanted to take a different approach to it, and we ultimately did take a different approach. And this is where I would come back to the wouldn't compromise component of your question. Instead of looking at that 4-week target and looking at the process of pulling data out of their system, what I wanted the service delivery team to do was to start to break down that data set and the data that they needed into those 3 constituent components. So I just listed loans, members, and deposits. Those are the 3 big groups. And by what I wanted the service delivery team to do is break it down into those 3 groups and see if you can get the data out of our customer system in those 3 tranches or layers, if you will. They actually, to their credit, jumped all over the idea and helped me to push it. And ultimately, what we settled on is the realization that getting the member data or the consumer data and the deposit data is actually quite easy. You can get that data out of their software in a matter of a week or less. What that then allows you to do is you can upload just that part of the data, and you can get the customers training using the application moving forward with that limited set of data, while you wait for the hardest parts, the loan data, to come out of the system and to get uploaded. Because you could do that, you could then start to move and work in parallel between the data migration process and the customer training process. Because of that, we actually not only were able to meet that 4-week target for deployment on average, we actually brought that down to about 2.5 weeks as the new average and then the new target. So that transition, or that new not compromising approach, saved us up to 50% on our deployment times and got us into revenue 50% faster.
I'm going to ask this question. When I talk about using the FAQ as an overlay on top of STAR, it's because it's a very easy way to conceptualize making sure you're providing the right information to me, the interviewer. And the FAQs, if you do enough of these, you kind of watch enough of my videos, you're going to realize that it's, as a framework, it helps you go through the same sort of questions over and over again. That's actually okay. You don't need to be writing new questions that you answer as you walk through your answer every time. It actually makes it easier for you to structure your answers, and if you're kind of delivering against a cadence of known questions. And for this candidate, and I jotted down some notes, a step they could have taken would be walking through the questions that they meant to answer as part of what they were trying to deliver to me in this situation and task, which is, what problem were they trying to solve? What were the reasonably accomplishable metrics? What did they think was possible with a little bit more effort? And why was achieving this important to the business? Now, he did a good job of answering the first two questions, but the latter two are kind of missing in action here, which is a bit of a struggle when you consider how much time was used, right? Getting back to this, how long should I talk? How long should my answers be? And so in that context, doing the prep work ahead of time and walking through that framework of not what all is there to know, but what do I need to know? The interviewer, what do I need to know? Give me that information. And by structuring your stories using an FAQ format, you're making your life a lot easier. Trust me. Our mission at Interview At is to help 100,000 job seekers land their dream job. If you find this content helpful, I would love it if you spread the word. Go ahead, click on the like button. That's always appreciated. And subscribing to the channel, well, hopefully I earned that today. Also, don't forget we have loads of free content and paid content up at the website available for job seekers. Have a look, see if there's anything we can do for you. A jerk question. I don't mean it to sound like a jerk question, but 1.5 weeks on deployment time really isn't that much time, right? We're talking about 7 to 8 business days. So what help me? Because when you say, it's 50% faster, it sounds great, but we're dealing with small numbers. So help me understand what this really meant from like a revenue recognition and a scope of revenue. How much revenue was happening in that first week versus 52 weeks later, right? Is it a trickle and then it becomes a flood, or it starts high, stays high, and it's kind of consistent throughout? I'm just trying to understand, like, I'm not trying to minimize coming in a week and a half earlier. I'm just trying to understand, but what did that really do for the company? Remember when I said my customers love me because I give direct and pointed actionable feedback? Well, this is a case where I asked a very hard question intentionally to kind of challenge the candidate, right? The candidate was using metrics, great, but he was kind of doing it in a way that was I'm not going to say it was intellectually dishonest, because that implies intent, and that's not at all what was going on here. But by using a number like 50% when we're talking about a week, it kind of masks what happened here, right? And the question that I asked, the follow-up, was specifically trying to address, hey, look, I get it. You're trying to make your thing sound more impressive, but in reality, you're now interviewing, and for this candidate specifically, you're interviewing for a job at Amazon. This is a gigantic company where scale is enormous. You have to impress me, the interviewer, as an employee of Amazon, if that's who I was. You have to impress me that you understand the scale at which we operate. So when you're using numbers like 50%, you're trying to mask the fact that, well, you saved a week or two. Does it matter? Now, if that week or two was tens of millions of dollars, yeah, it does, right? But if the week or two is not, well, using the 50% feels dishonest. And if I, the interviewer, don't decide to follow up and I just kind of make a note to myself like, 50%, but really it's like a week, it doesn't reflect well on you, the candidate. And certainly when I get up and walk out, am I going to advocate for you? Probably not, right? Because my reaction to that is probably going to be negative, right? I feel good about working at Amazon or whatever company that you're interviewing at. I feel very protective of the environment here. And I'm going to use my personal equity to advocate for you, but I don't really feel like you're kind of talking about things that help me believe that you're going to be able to operate at the scale that we operate here. Probably won't do it, right? So this is where it gets tricky. You want to use numbers that are impressive, but you also don't want to do it in a way that might potentially mask things that are less impressive.
So maybe in terms of revenue, I'll address that part first. The impact was not so significant. So our pricing model is a subscription service fee, and it's monthly. So basically, as soon as you start using, that is the first date that you're billed. But because it's a monthly subscription fee, you're right. 1 to 1.5 weeks doesn't make a huge impact in terms of revenue. Where that did make a big impact is on the service delivery team's ability to scale out and scale their process. The service delivery team was able to take on a per person basis, more cooperatives and handle them more efficiently as a result of this. So they became less of a bottleneck in the process. Ultimately, that means you don't have to hire nearly so many service delivery people. In addition, from a customer relationship perspective, and sadly, I don't have, say, a customer satisfaction survey to back this answer up or back this part of it up, you were able to get them up and running on the software significantly faster. And as a result, customer satisfaction went up. It was a big win.
It's a reasonable inference to draw. I mean, I need schedule versus not. Sure, I get that. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so normally this is the part where I would ask, how did the outcome compare to what you'd set for your original goals? But I guess I think, because I want to see how you think about this, are you surprised by the outcome?
Am I surprised that we were able to bring it from, say, again, 4 weeks down to 2? Well, I suppose the answer has to be yes, because it is a little bit odd that, somebody coming in whose domain is not this service delivery deployment process comes in and finds a solution like this. That is, in and of itself, a bit surprising just on its face. In terms of 2 weeks itself as an outcome, just taken on its face, I think that that's perhaps not so surprising. If anything, 4 weeks maybe would have, if you were just thinking about this intuitively. Our customers, I should say, are small institutions that don't have, terabytes of data. They have gigabytes of data or metabytes sometimes. Megabytes, I believe it is, not metabytes. And so the process of going through this data migration process and the training really doesn't seem as though it should be taking that long. So from that perspective, intuitively, 2 weeks seems about right. So yes, I'm surprised that I was the one who found it, but no, 2 weeks is not a surprising number.
So one of the things that might be interesting about listening to this candidate's answers is, this is a candidate who was targeting an account executive role, right? That's kind of a sales role. And their resume and titles didn't really reflect a one-to-one mapping there. And the takeaway for you, the viewer, is that, look, you can have a variety of experiences. And when you're trying to get to a next level company or perhaps change industries or even change job families altogether, it is possible to demonstrate competency, high levels of competency in your existing roles where you can help me, the interviewer, kind of envision a world in which you can do the job that we're targeting. Even if you don't necessarily have a one-to-one skill set translation. So that's just a reality to kind of keep in mind. Don't fear the job change. Don't fear the role change. Don't fear the industry change, right? If you present well and you come off as, multiple leadership principles exhibited in a single answer, command of the metrics, deep understanding of the problem you were solving, and an ability to communicate in an effective way, all of those things help me, the interviewer, imagine you in this role. A common go-to that I have for my customers is that they need to draw on experiences which are going to help me, the interviewer, imagine you meeting the expectations of the company. One of the problems that creates is the bigger and more impressive the company that you're targeting, you, the interviewer, are targeting, the higher those expectations are. What that means is when you present a story where the stakes kind of feel small ball and unimpressive, it creates an artificial blocker in terms of my ability, me, the interviewer, to imagine you, the candidate, in this role, working at this company, having not had experience, which helps me believe that you can come into this company and do great things. So what does that mean for you, the candidate? Well, it means that story selection is super important. And when you're selecting your stories, especially where scale type things come into play, you want to focus on the stories that exhibit that in the role you were in, you took on extraordinary work or you delivered extraordinary results for your role at your company, in your industry. If you're the go-to person for all the really hard stuff and you're consistently over-delivering within your org, that's literally the best you can do to help me envision you working at a company, say like Amazon, Facebook, Google, whatever, where, and this happens all the time. And I used to hate when I would see these, when I would sit on interview assessment panels and you'd hear the person say, wow, they can't operate at our scale. They don't have our experience to work at our scale. It's such a nonsense thing to say because no one, who has built an Amazon, really? Even the people that have been at Amazon for the last 3 or 4 years didn't actively build that. They kind of jumped into the role. Maybe they came from another company and they had that skill. But the reality is like, look, if you've done great things and you can demonstrate extraordinary results that scale beyond what was expected for your role, for your company, for your industry, that's a good starting point for the story selection. Finally, here's the assessment of the candidate that I would have read into the room had I been on the panel for this candidate. While it's clear that the candidate was acting on the best of intentions for the outcome for the company, it is not clear that the candidate had a clear plan for what marginal improvements would mean for the service delivery team. The follow-up questions eventually revealed the cost structure, human capital, related to the delivery, and thus helped provide context as to what each additional week could mean. The stakes could be viewed as somewhat low without additional human capital context. However, and this is important, the level of ownership to work on the improvements and hold the line on improving beyond their targets, the candidate was overperforming by a substantial margin for the target L4 role and is more aligned with L6 expectations. Okay, L4, L6, those are specific to Amazon leveling, and that was the feedback I was trying to give this candidate because he was targeting Amazon. But what's important here is this candidate was way overpowered, way OP for the role that they were targeting. And as it turned out, what went down the line, they ended up getting a higher level offer. Right? Kind of the feedback I gave was like, look, you're aiming way too low inside the organization. Someone's going to pick this up in the interview loop, and they're going to come back to you, and they're going to give you a higher offer. And that's exactly what happened. So cool that I still can identify right levels. But more importantly, again, this was someone transitioning, trying to get a job at Amazon, coming from outside the industry, and they figured, well, I should aim low because I haven't done that role, and certainly not a company of that size. And the reality is when you show up, you have good stories, competently walk through, and throughout the entirety of the interview, as a totality interview, very competent, great use of metrics, deep understanding of what he's trying to do, showed multiple leadership principles within a single answer. These are all great things that help me, the interviewer, envision the candidate in this role. And sometimes say, you know what, I think they're aiming too low and we should probably up the level for this person if we're going to hire them. So that was a great outcome for the candidate, but that's just something for you to think about, which is even though you've never worked at an Amazon, Facebook, whatever, the manga, or whatever we're using to call these companies, even though you might not have yet worked and this is your first attempt to get into one of those companies, you can overperform in the interview by just being a great storyteller.